started. Thank you for everyone joining us today. My name is Weller Emmons, and I'm joined here by Derek Wynn. We're here to talk about the Northern Virginia economic situation and the impact to employees. We think there's a lot going on in the Northern Virginia, DC market area, and it'll have a large impact, especially as it comes to benefits plan design for the year 2023. Derek is a part of Business Benefits Group, also known as BBG, and they're a local brokerage in the area who can help your business identify a benefits package solution. So let's get to it. I'm the VP of Operations at Employer Advisor. For those who are unfamiliar with Employer, we are a platform that enables employers to connect with business benefits advisors such as Derek. We have a variety of different tools and search capabilities and calculators to help you in your benefits decision process. And Derek, if you'll introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thanks, Weller. Yeah, I'm Derek Wynn with BBG, and we help businesses to achieve more with their benefit programs.
Right.
One of the things I'll say is, I don't like to talk everything about, what we do and how we do it. A couple of different things that I will point out, though, is that we really take a keen interest in topics like this, because at the end of the day, an employer is really trying their hardest right now to be able to attract and retain talent. And at the same time, that comes to a crossroads when it comes to cost, sustainability, and just overall affordability for employees too. So one of the big things that we focused on, for the 30 years almost that we've been around, is really trying to be an innovator and a trailblazer. So, that's what we've been having a lot of fun with, is really helping to, unpackage a lot of these challenging situations that are facing employers right now.
Thank you, Derek. And Employer also tries to help on that situation, or for any normal situation if you're looking for a benefit advisor. We have over 150 plus brokerage partners spread across the country, and Derek and team are one of our preferred partners in the Northern Virginia area. All right, we'll hop into the meat of the webinar now. If you have any questions, please feel free to throw it into the Q&A chat below. We'll respond to those if it's pertinent to that slide, and if not, we'll have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar. All right. So the first part of the webinar is going to be looking at some of the economic position of the Northern Virginia market. And so what we have here is the population growth of both the United States as a whole, Virginia as a state, and then the DC market itself. And what we can see is that since 2000, the DC market has grown much more rapidly than both Virginia or the national averages. And that's a lot to do with how much more attractive DC has become from a general business perspective. And it's just drawing a lot of talent and influx into that metropolitan area. However, if you take a look in the last year or so, we've actually seen a dip in growth for the DC market. And really what we believe that is an impact due to COVID. We're seeing more people be able to work from home, and they're moving out of larger metropolitan areas. So we're seeing this kind of population decrease in other major areas as people seek out lower cost of living areas across the country, and they take their job with them, which is a benefit to them. In terms of reviewing the job market of the area, what we have here is how jobs have grown over time. And of course, we've seen a massive crater right when COVID happened, which has happened across the country as millions of people were temporarily laid off or lost their jobs as COVID. And we've seen a nice rebound. If we look over here to do a little more recent, just going back from January 19 to mid-summer this year, we see that DC has not quite rebounded to where it was back in January of 2019. It's getting close, and it's actually lagged behind the national and state averages. Again, we see this to be most common in major metropolitan areas. You've had a population decrease. You've had people who can now work elsewhere, and they've taken their job elsewhere. So it's slowing down things in the DC area. At a national level, we're seeing some very interesting trends. So on the left chart here, we have year-over-year employment change across the United States. On the right, we have earnings change. And what we've generally seen is as people relocate out of major metropolitan areas, that they tend to also move to the southern part of the United States and to less restrictive tax regimes. So we're seeing a large increase in the Sun Belt, in particular, Texas and Florida come to mind. And here you can see they're one of the darker blue areas. But even as people are migrating more so to those areas, we're still seeing increase in earnings across the nation. And of course, North Dakota is having a little bit of an oil boom, so they're getting a nice little pop up there. But the reason we're seeing such a large scale increase nationally is there's a shortage of workers. Unemployment rates are very low, and there's still a large demand for workers right now. So we have seen businesses compete with one another and trying to attract employers. And what this is doing is ultimately driving wage growth for people who are looking for new jobs.
And I'll chime in real quick too, just to offer some other ideas around this, because I do think that COVID really accelerated a lot of this. I think a lot of us were destined to be in this situation. But one of the things I would put out there for employers to think about is really, when you're taking a person and a job and putting them in a suitcase and saying you can go work wherever, and they're taking that job with them, this has really caused some ripple effects in terms of those wages. And I think one of the big things that potentially has come back to hurt employers in that process is that conversation around, okay, so well, since you're leaving DC and you're going to Des Moines, Iowa, we're going to reduce your wage along with it because of the cost of living, I think that's still a conversation that's being had among employers, and it's just something to think about, because at the end of the day, it doesn't mean that it's still affordable everywhere, right? There's a ton of rift in that market, in the job market itself, and employers are still struggling to find people to fill seats.
Now, as we start to look at what industries make up the Northern Virginia market, we notice that the Northern Virginia market is very unique. And it makes sense given that we have the capital of the United States right there, and that DC, compared to every other market, has a overemphasis on government-related jobs. The national average is 14%. DC has nearly 21%. And I think that naturally makes sense given all the federal positions in the market. So other things that are very interesting is the increase in business services as compared to other industries. So we're looking at nearly 25% of the market is in some kind of business service. And a business service can be pretty broad, but usually it's any kind of white collar worker who services a business. And so you have accountants, lawyers, consultants, lobbyists. And we see a lot of that in the DC market as people are there trying to win business from a federal level. And there's just a lot of, it's a center of knowledge, I guess, is the best way to put it. And so you see a lot of white collar jobs in the DC market.
I think a lot of people on this call will also relate to the fact that, in our market, when you're performing work for the federal government, it's also pretty compliance heavy, right? So I think there's a ton of ancillary businesses that have really been the benefactor of that, working in that business support area. I think that's a huge opportunity for businesses still moving forward. So I think that's really important to point out. And I think that, this is also a good example of, rising tide lifts all boats. I think that the growth in this area, especially when you talk about the diversification we're going to start to see with Amazon HQ2, if you've been around this area for more than 30 years now, you remember what AOL did for the region, 30 some odd years ago. So I am really excited about that, because I think that all sectors are going to see a lift. Once we kind of get through some of the economic headwinds we might be facing, I think that this is still going to be very good for the market overall.
Yeah. And one thing I want to really call out once again is the government's overconcentration of jobs, because that will have some impact in some of the latter slides we'll see in this presentation. So here we've broken down the industry growth by both a month over month and a year over year. And we've kind of done some interesting analysis. And one thing that really pops out is up here in the top right corner is restaurants and hotels, with a 1% month over month growth and nearly 12% year over year growth. This makes sense given that DC has opened up from the COVID protocols. We're seeing a return in both tourism and in business travel to the DC market. So there's a lot of need for that kind of hospitality industry and a return of jobs to support the influx of travelers to DC. On the other end, we've seen government with a decrease month over month and kind of flat year over year. And given, once again, the oversized impact of government for the DC market, we believe that segment as a whole may be bringing down the overall average of the DC market. Derek, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think the one other part that I would focus on too is, when we take a look at growth across the region, growth is often measured by, the skyline. And I do think that, that's something else that we've seen, so much go into infrastructure over the last several years, as well as, all of the commercial developments, that's starting to cool off a bit, right? Especially when you look at that construction bubble. It is still on the up and up, but at the end of the day, it's, a little bit down month over month. I think that could also tie back to again, some of the other factors that are weighing into this. Businesses aren't as excited to have an office space when they have a remote workforce, right? So there's a number of different factors that go into that, but still by and large, all of the great areas of growth still remain concentrated on areas like business services, IT, so on and so forth, which tend to be very healthy businesses for this market as well.
And then as we look at wage growth in the market, we see that since January of 19, the wage growth in the DC market has lagged behind the national average, and it's pretty much on par with the state average. And the thing that we think is probably most impactful is, one, you have, going back to the above slides, you've had the decrease in population, you've had a decrease in jobs that haven't quite returned to your pre-pandemic levels. So it's just not as high as a labor market or tight labor market has been in other places to drive that increase. And then secondly, that's probably even more important, is there's so many public sector jobs in the DC market, and those jobs do not tend to react to wage conditions as quickly as private sector jobs do.
Yeah, I'll offer something else on this too, which is, it'll be interesting to take a look at this and if we had access to all of the data, to also build in something like non-cash compensation as well, right? To talk about total benefits and rewards, because as we know, DC is also home to a large swath of nonprofits, associations, like Weller said, the government services side, where there's actually like a larger tilt toward benefits than maybe some other private sector employers. So I do think that overall, we do tend to see, the region, sometimes, not all the time, kind of trail behind some of this national averages when we look at pure wages. But I think that's also going to be really important for employers to take note of, especially again, as we look ahead to some of the changes we have coming up. We're dealing with a lot of inflationary issues right now. So employees who've lived at or above their means for a period of time, they could end up in a situation of, really being desperate. And when employees become desperate, that's when they end up leaving, right? Because it's sometimes seen as being easier to negotiate a higher salary with a different employer than to renegotiate their current offer from the current employer. So there's a lot that we could talk about on this, but I think every business should really take a close look at really where they stack up. There's a ton of tools that we'll talk about to be able to help with that.
Thank you. So the first half again was all around kind of the economic situation, and it can be a little dull, but I promise you it pays off dividends, because this is where it starts to impact your business going forward. So as we think through it again, we're seeing inflation rise across the nation. I think the numbers actually came out today at 8.2% early this morning. This was prepared before those CPI numbers came out this morning. But we're seeing inflation increase. We're seeing job openings increase. So it's creating all that inflationary pressure as employers try to attract new talent. And where we think this is really going to start to hit home with you guys is that we're seeing a large increase in insurance filings across the nation. To provide a little background, usually the hospital systems and the insurance companies enter into multiple year contracts. And as those multiple year contracts fall off and renew, the hospital systems try to push for higher reimbursement. And hospital systems have been facing large inflationary pressures from the supply chain and from their own labor costs. And they're now pushing a lot of their costs back to the insurers, and ultimately which will push down to the employers. So as we look across the nation, we're seeing this trend And we think this trend will actually continue for the next 2 to 3 years as each year those contracts kind of roll over and renew. So if you look at the high end, we're seeing DC at a 21% premium increase filed. And what's interesting enough, at the low end, we see Virginia with a negative 13% increase filed. And what's really happening in the Virginia state is there's an implementation of a reinsurance waiver that went into effect this year, or will take impact next year, I guess, to be technical, that allows for carriers to reduce their financial risk for individuals if they exceed a certain threshold of claims. So this in effect allows the insurers to lay off a lot of their risk and pass off to the public. And what it allows them to ultimately do is reduce their premiums. So that's what we're seeing happening in Virginia specifically.
And I'll add a couple of different things to that, which, the first thing to keep in mind is that this is like all in all going to be all in, and it's really focused again on small groups, individuals, et cetera. So like your mileage may vary, as we say, but I think as Weller mentioned before, I think there's also a lot of deep rooted animosity between hospitals and insurers. Hospitals were forced to, I'm not going to say close their doors, but pretty darn close to it during COVID. Like in Virginia, we had a moratorium on elective surgeries. Volumes were way down in emergency rooms and other areas. Plus, we have some other tail factors going into this, such as like the No Surprises Act. So hospitals are now in a position of potentially looking at reduced revenues because they can no longer send surprise bills for some of the services that might be rendered. And what that's doing is it's creating, again, higher stakes at the bargaining table. And the best example of that I can give you right now is with Johns Hopkins. It's the first high-profile case we've seen in the area, but Johns Hopkins has said we will be out of network with Care First effective on December 5th of this year, unless a new deal is reached. And as Weller mentioned, that's when we come to the negotiating table. Every year, you've got hospitals and health insurers, health plans renegotiating their deals. I don't know where it's going to land, but I do think that it's potentially setting up for, as Weller mentioned, 2 to 3 years ahead of potential rate shifts upward, because at the end of the day, they're frenemies, they rely on each other. And part of that is they're going to ask insurance companies to pay more. Insurance companies are going to ask you to pay more, which means you're going to ask employees to pay more. So I think all of these, create a really unique storm coming up here over the next couple of years.
So as we think about all this, we want to start thinking about who do we want to recruit and retain from our employees. So in the bottom left corner here, we have just a sample chart that we've used previously that allows you to plot employees on a dual axis of either being a high performer or a high potential. And if they're in the upper right corner of being both a high performer and a high potential, those are the individuals that you really want to keep and retain for your business, and you want to offer whatever you can to retain them.
Yeah. I think one of the big things we come back to, especially when you look at benefits as a part of the strategy, it's funny because this chart is very similar to one of the charts that we use with our clients. We'll do benefit surveys with employees. We'll ask them, how much of an impact did benefits have on your decision to join with the company, but also to stay with the company. And generally speaking, what we tend to find is that, generally more than half will say that benefits had little to no impact on the decision to join a company or stay with it. Every company is going to be different. But at the end of the day, I think that companies have to look at a balanced approach between wages and benefits to make sure that they are competitive, just on a more comprehensive level than going all in on one strategy or another, because at the end of the day, everyone has different needs and wants. Now, one of the things that I would say too, kind of going back to some of the earlier points and some of the things we alluded to, at the end of the day, we're really encouraging employers to take a more data-driven approach to understanding where they stack up. So taking a look at where your business stacks up as far as, for example, salary benchmarking, but also benefits benchmarking, which Employer Advisor can help with. And we have tools on the salary benchmarking side. I think that that's going to help to head off some of those potential issues with employees leaving. It's also going to be really important too if you're coming up on performance evaluations, right? So these are things you want to be thinking about to think about how you stack up on a total compensation standard, right? So salary plus non-cash compensation should all be things you're looking at when you're doing performance reviews, making job offers, seeking to retain employees. In addition to that, one of the other big things I think is really important is, they said at the beginning of 2022, this is going to be the year of empathy. And the reason why is because employees have been through a lot, just like businesses have been through a lot after COVID. But I think that also comes in manifests itself in other forms too, which is to be flexible. We want to be flexible in terms of where the work is being performed. We want to be flexible on when the work is being performed, but that flexibility should also extend to your employee benefits program. Sometimes offering more options or a wider array of options can all help to drive your decisions at the renewal table. But I also think that sometimes looking inward to solicit some of that internal data can be helpful too. For example, do you know what your employees want? Have you taken a look at what your competitors are doing? A lot of times I'll have clients that'll reach out to me because, they've got someone who's a mole and they'll go into another business and say, hey, can you help to benchmark our plan against this one? They've been a thorn in our side when it comes to taking our employees away. I think every business should be doing that, right? I do think national level and regional level benchmarking is really the best metric for it. But at the end of the day, you could end up in a situation like that. The other big thing I would think about is really trying to build a long-term strategic plan. And that really starts with understanding the needs, wants, and desires of your workforce, but also understanding at the same time what the business is capable of. What can the business afford to provide? What can the business really afford to provide, not just today, but also the next 5 years? So I think that businesses should really focus on developing this long-term strategic plan or strategy. And one of the ways you can do that is, again, by understanding where you are today, right? The better you understand where you are today, and you also understand your business goals or objectives over the next 3 to 5 years, the better you can build a plan to go along with it. And one of the things I would say about that at the same time is to keep in mind, businesses have faced plenty of headwinds, but also at the same time, employees are facing headwinds too. When we start to think about where employees are from, just an overall income perspective relative to the cost of living, I think that there's an opportunity there for employers to think about, okay, what other benefits could we potentially offer or provide that are little to no cost to us, but provide a tremendous amount of value to employees, right? We know that prior to all of this, prior to the headline inflation figures and everything else, it was estimated like 26% of all people have deferred medical services because they're afraid of cost, right? They have a fear of that. So you could do things in that process, such as right-sizing your benefits program based on the needs of your workforce or the needs of the business. And I think that there's other ancillary tools such as, interest-free loan options, providing added education on how to save for retirement, how to save money in an HSA, how to leverage it, make sure you're getting all the tax advantages you can. I think all of those are things that we need to be thinking about. And last but not least, we really need to continue to monitor it. So hopefully webinars like this and all of the support that Employer Advisor offers out to the businesses in the market, as well as what we can do. I think that all of these are great tools. But at the end of the day, a business should always try to keep a pulse on, their own workforce, their own business. And we have certainly some ways we can help with that.
And with that, we'll move into our Q&A session. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to throw it into the chat. We'll go ahead and get started. One of the questions we frequently get is, wage increases are severely impacting our expenses. Additional increases in healthcare will push us over the limit. What are some things we can do to retain expenses going forward?
Yeah, I think the big thing on a situation like that is, again, understanding like what's driving your cost, right? What are the things that are driving your cost? Give you an example. I was talking to a business a couple of weeks ago, and one of the biggest drivers for their cost was actually their age, right? And they're not getting younger. They aren't able to bring in some of the younger employees that are out there because they require more skilled workforce. So the question at that point becomes, what can you do with what you have to be able to help preserve your age as an organization? And when you do that, you can start to reduce claims as well. Another good example on that is to take a look at some of the more innovative solutions that are available in the market today when it comes down to funding. We still see a ton of businesses out there who are fully insured health plans on a very traditional health plan. And there are some really innovative solutions available still on a fully insured plan or even a self-insured plan to be able to help with making sure that you are, again, maximizing every dollar you're spending on your benefits program. It starts with gathering data, and it really ends up manifesting itself best when you're talking to your advisor to understand, what your data is telling you, where your data is likely to take you, but also at the same time, what options are available to mitigate cost. We've seen an aggregation of marginal declines across benefit programs where employers have continued to push up deductibles, push up cost shares in other areas. And that's impacted their overall ability to recruit and retain employees. So I think that there are a number of different things that we need to be focused on when you're having that conversation, but it really should be that long-term strategic plan where it starts.
Okay. Another question we've received is on slide 16 of the presentation. You guys mentioned that there are different cohorts of employees who may want and or need different benefits. What is the best way to help understand what my employees want or need?
Yeah, I think getting that survey data. I think that's the best thing to do, because I could look at two different businesses. I could have two different businesses, even the same average age, totally different industries, could be the same industry, I don't know. But at the end of the day, they're going to have very different needs and wants. A lot of times I like to say, your vibe attracts your tribe, right? So think about a business and think about the people that you work with or work for you. And generally speaking, there's going to be a pretty consistent culture that's there. But at the same time, let's not discount the fact that we have differing opinions, we have differing values, we have differing needs, wants, and desires. I'll go into this for a second, which is, I think, the concept and topic of, let's say, recession era benefit programs, that's also becoming a topic of conversation. I was in this industry through 2008. So I saw what happened to benefit programs and how employers kind of adapted their programs and offerings to align with the times. I think we're going to find ourselves back in that same situation. So I do think that there's potentially more urgency right now today to get ahead of cost, to get ahead of strategy, and make sure that you are, again, addressing the needs of your workforce, but you've got to understand what those needs, wants, and desires are. Get the data. Take a look at candidates who decline the option to join your business, right? But from potential job candidates, take a look at why people left, right? Take a look at where your people are right now today. That's your best resource to hang on to, or the employees working for you today are the ones you really want to hang on to. And if you can do that, chances are you'll find other ones like them.
Yeah, and I feel like surveys don't have to be as overly formal as some people think they have to be.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great if you can do a formal survey, but even just having conversations around the water cooler in your office will get you a lot of insights of what your different employees want. But you just have to make sure you're talking to a wide sampling of employees and not focusing in on only one segment of employees, because you might get a biased opinion if you're only talking to your older C-suite employees versus your younger entry-level employees.
A lot of people might cringe at the idea of a survey, but here's what you can do to make it fun. Do a series of what we call micro surveys, 2 to 5 questions, and do it 3 to 4 times a year. It's a lot more bite-sized, digestible, a lot more fun, etc. We have here your codes for SHRM and HRCI credits. Don't worry about running to write all of these down. You'll get a copy of the deck as well. So again, this is to help get you your continuing education credits. And in a couple of slides too, you'll see a reminder. You can always tune into other BBG webinars down the road too, because we often have credits associated with them also.
Yeah. And one last thing I'll make on the survey before we close out is, if you don't want to survey, you can always take a census file and look at what kind of employee mix you have. Are they young? Are they old? Or more male, more female? And then you can match it up against prioritization surveys. So Employer Advisor has a benchmark that says older males prefer this versus younger females prefer this kind of benefit. And it's a forced ranking. And that may be a good way to kind of shortcut a survey if you don't have the time or the capacity to run a survey right now. And last but not least, Derek, what should employers look for when they're looking for a competent benefits advisor?
I think one of the biggest things you should be doing is talking to your advisor and just asking the simple question of, where do you see the market going? Right? Just having a tabletop conversation, not even looking at spreadsheets, like where's the market going? A conversation like this is definitely a good place to start. But also, I think what you should be looking at is beyond all of the tools, resources, and people they have to offer, you should be looking for their unique perspectives. You should be looking for, how they help to solve problems. What are some of the ways they've done it for clients in the past? And what can they do for your business to build that really long-term strategic approach?
Well, thank you so much, Derek. And thank you for everyone joining. Derek, I'll let you close it out and we'll say goodbye.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. Thank you, Employer Advisor, for helping to put this together. And also thank you, everyone else, for joining today. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you, everyone. Well, hope everyone has a good afternoon.
Thanks again.